Well, we're getting to that time where Francis wants to regularize this life that he's been leading for 2-3 years, and he writes a rule, and he said it'll be very strict. It'll just be evangelical precepts. And from Assisi down to Rome, he made a trip with his now 12 followers. So it was a little bit imitation of Jesus. And they reach Rome, and this is an image that's painted by Giotto in the upper basilica in Assisi. And the characters here are Pope Innocent III, who's lying down and having a dream. And in his dream, he sees a robed man holding up a church which is collapsing. And Francis had arrived in Rome just at that time. And I don't know how accurate this story is. How could it possibly be that he dreamed about Francis? And the next day, Francis is in St. John Lateran saying, "Could I and my brothers have an audience with the Pope?" And the guards were saying, "No, you can't. You're just, you're not on the schedule. And you're not important, and you're not going to meet the Pope." And somehow the Pope was there, not far away, and looked down the distance and said, "That is the man I saw in my dream. Let him come to me," he said to the guards. And Francis came and he said, "Here, I've drawn up a rule of life. And I want you to approve it as the rule of life of the Franciscan order." And this is the depiction of him handing that rule to Pope Innocent. Innocent says, "I'll look it over." And he approves the rule, although he says, "I'm concerned that it may be too difficult for you to follow." So that's in 1209. And we are now...
Just a word about that, Bob, if I may. I believe the church that Francis is holding up is St. John Lateran, isn't it? And what is really interesting, I think, in all of this is the charism of the Pope, because a lot of the cardinals opposed him. And they said, you know, there was a lot of heresy, a lot of mendicants going around Europe at this time. And a lot of them were extreme. They didn't want to follow the Pope. They wanted to do things, really construct their own church, because they saw the church was falling into ruins. And so they wanted to devise their own church. But it's amazing, I think, how Pope Innocent III, who's a very powerful man, I mean, he has a lot of political influence. He has a great theological formation, but he sees in this poor friar one who will begin to bring the church back to its origins. In fact, when the cardinals begin to oppose him, it's interesting, because we see some of that perhaps even coming in our own days. This is what Pope Innocent says to them: "This is truly the man who with example and doctrine will uphold the Church of Christ." I think there's a real message there, and perhaps Bishop will speak to us, because Francis wanted to renew the church, but always in the church with the Pope and not in opposition to the Pope. And that's why really I think his charism has had such great impact through all of these years. He remained faithful to the Holy Father and faithful to Rome, even in the difficulties, struggles, and challenges he saw. Maybe, Bishop, you'd like to say a word on that?
Yes, Tony, it's just to highlight this aspect of the charisma and of the life of St. Francis. It distinguishes St. Francis among all people of his age who wanted a reform for the church. And there was a need of a reform, but they want a reform against the pastors, the shepherds of the church, forgetting that Jesus in his incarnation wanted to be the head of a body. We don't find Christ anymore only in his personal life and in personal phase, we find what Saint Augustine used to say, the whole Christ, Christus totus. Christus is the head in his personal existence, and we are Christ. We are not only Christians, we are Christ in a certain sense. And this was what Francis understood. I used to say this was also from the school of the Bishop of Assisi. You looked at the image in the sala, in the room of renunciation. Francis, with such a tenderness, put his face on the legs and in the arms of the bishop. He was at the school of the church and learned Christ is united to his church, although we know from our experience that the church made of sinners is always needing a reformation and a conversion. But he understood that Christ does not leave his church anymore, does not abandon his church anymore. And so he wants to be really the image of Christ for the church, You, Francis, repair my church, or bring my spouse to his beautifulness. This is important to understand what really Francis was.